All right, welcome everyone. Today we have the great pleasure of hearing Nick present his senior seminar. I wanted to welcome you all here, say a few words about Nick, and then I will turn it over to him, have his presentation. There'll be time for question and answers, and then that's it. Put a fork in it and be done. So I have known Nick your entire time here at Blackburn, and it has been an absolute delight. I think Nick exemplifies a really beautiful combination of intellectual curiosity and also he's just a very kind, genuine person. Nick is really a delight to have in the classroom. He's usually the first one to laugh at a joke. He's in with everybody. Everybody gets along with Nick, and that's not an easy thing to do. He's just someone that he's always better when Nick is in the group and when Nick is around. But at the same time, Nick is really insightful, has a very deep intellectual curiosity, and often wants to know why or what happened, how did this come to be? And I think we get to see this in his seminar presentation really beautifully tonight. Because the seminar really brings together two important skills: seeking to understand how a system becomes the way that it becomes and how it can create really unequal outcomes for people. And at the same time, where it would be easy to get lost in the data and talking about institutions, Nick has a really personal human touch that he brings to this. So without further ado, turn it over to Nick Johnson.
So my senior seminar was based on the effectiveness of drug rehabilitation versus incarceration. What I wanted to know is how does public perception play a role in dealing with offenders? I do want to thank Dr. Lee Locker, Dr. Pfeffer, and Dr. Ryan for their time and helping me with the seminar, giving me advice of what I should or shouldn't do. The clicker not working.
It just worked. I don't know. We have the worst luck with this, Nick. I'm so sorry. Wait, here it goes. Here, it's working now. Okay.
So drugs, opioids, and addiction has made its way into American culture. And with it, we want to know, how do we combat this crisis? There's an epidemic of young Black and brown individuals, people who look just like me, who wear the paraphernalia of drugs or opioids and are targeted based on their race. People are being thrown in jail for misunderstood addiction to drugs and lack of help within our very own communities. I would like to take some of your time to explain why some of the people that stand and sit before you today have the issue that they do. That generations of generalizations and stereotypes have affected certain people negatively. That the system itself might need to see change before the individual can change themselves. This is more than just a problem, but research would even argue a pandemic or nationwide emergency. Being the #8 leading cause of death in America, just under diabetes, this takes over the lives of 70,000 Americans each year. So why are drugs and addictions not looked at as a public health emergency? Opioids have their permanent place in American culture. Whether used to obtain a high or get an edge or commit a violent offense, opioids have established their prevalence in our society. Americans have been long punished for using opioids, marijuana, crack, cocaine, instead of being educated on why it may be wrong for opioid users to indulge in the drugs they abuse. According to an outcome study on the naloxone education and dispensing program for departure patients at Cermak Health Services of Cook County, researchers have found that 83% of people did not have a complete understanding of overdosing. This may lead to malicious decisions in their future. Understanding drugs and addiction may be more beneficial than penalizing a person who cannot fully comprehend what they are doing to themselves or another person. It is crucial that research be done around these premises because this data is crucial to speak out for the lives of many who are impacted by opioids. If there is data to be found that rehabilitation is a more effective method than a traditional punishment route, it could potentially change the lives of thousands of inmates and change the trajectory of the drug incarceration route. In addition to this, if public perception has an impact on drug usage, it can be argued through research that not only different drug charges are subjective, but social conditioning has made us believe that one drug can carry a higher sentence than another. In substance misuse literature, addiction is variously defined as a brain disease, a sin, a sense of helplessness, excessive behavior, a bad habit, personal choice, an expression of self-determination, a moral and spiritual deficiency, and to William Miller, addiction is fundamentally a problem of motivation, or simply put, addiction is an addiction. There are many definitions of addiction amongst many sources of literature in the realm of substance dependence. Defining addiction can be quite difficult because it's perceived as so many different things to so many different people. Addiction to one may look like a family on the verge of eviction every month because the homeowners decide that pills place more importance than the stability of the family. Addiction may be a mother who comes home from drinking every once in a while to vent her anger towards an undeserving husband who she emotionally deprived. Addiction is, to many people, taking substances to cure an undefined pain, suffer from early childhood trauma. Addiction may not even be noticeable to everyone because addiction is not a catch-all term. It is very situational, very circumstantial, and sometimes unidentifiable until it's too late. The American Psychiatric Association uses the term substance dependence instead of addiction. The reason being that substance dependence is more of an inclusive term than the addiction definition and its derogatory connotation. According to the APA, the diagnosis of substance dependence disorder requires the following: the presence of a maladaptive pattern of substance use resulting in distress or clinically significant impairment involving at least 3 of the following symptoms: tolerance withdrawal problems, use of substance longer than intended, and unsuccessful attempts to control or reduce consumption, spending excessive amount of time procuring, using, or recovering from its effects. Reduced involvement in social, occupational, or recreational activities continue despite the presence of recurrent physical and psychological problems. Substance dependence captures a wide variety of situational circumstances that occur within substance abuse. Addiction to opioids affect each individual differently. At a base level, drug use greatly affects an individual's dietary behavior and compromises their nutritional status. However, some more than others compromise their lifestyle to abuse opioids. Leaving a stable lifestyle to pursue an addiction habit is very common amongst users. The money is spent on drugs rather than the basic necessities such as food, housing, and water. And this is because psychologically, this person's craving for drugs is more important than life itself. Is addiction reversible? As detrimental as it gets, all addiction has the potential to be reversed. One example of this includes physical exercise. Physical exercise is important because just like drugs, it has an influence that is not only physical, but psychological as well. Both endorphins and serotonin are released in the brain during physical activity. These 2 chemicals help control stress, alleviate pain, and create a general sense of well-being. Various exercises have been shown to aid this claim. One specific study, the effects of moderate physical activity on offenders in a rehabilitative program, demonstrates the importance of exercise from recovery of substance abuse. 105 inmates participated in the study, observing how moderate exercise for 4 days out of the week increased their morale and addiction habits. 69% of participants reported that it helped them in their recovery plans. As bad as addiction gets, this is a clear example of rehabilitation outlet that an abuser could use to possibly recover. The important piece is the time and healing that it takes, which is why public perception and the idea of rehabilitation may be skewed for some. So where did public perception of drug use come from? Public viewing or perception of an event changes a narrative of how society views the topic. To provide further evidence for this claim, the 9/11 bombing shaped public perception of extremists and religious factions. Once seen as notable Islamist and Christian extremists were viewed in a negative light, and the public quickly realized that more airport security was needed. In light of this, the Transport Security Administration, they upped their security and singled out individuals with hijabs and cultural clothing. Public perception, or how the public perceives an event or actions, is a factor in morale or in a factor of morals or activities such as drug uses because the public perception determines public policy and framing in the issue. When an issue is given notoriety, it is effectively seen to the public on what aspects to judge said issue. For example, no one bats an eye at pharmacists selling drugs, but now all of a sudden I want to do it on the street, and America got a problem with it. No one bats an eye at sex in a marriage, but if Dr. Wheelocker committed adultery, it would be a talk of parliament. When it is done between married couples, it is seen as deviant. It does not break social norms. However, when it is done out of that social context, it is seen as bad. The rich and powerful often make decisions about what happens in a society. Public perception shapes laws about drugs. Policy decisions come from how certain individuals view drugs. The US had a perception of cocaine, quote, cocaine-crazed Negroes, end quote, for a little over a century. Headlines such as that of the New York Times in 1914, just before the passage of the Harrison Act, quote, Negro cocaine fiends are a new Southern menace, murder and insanity increasing among lower class Blacks because they have taken to sniffing since deprived of whiskey by prohibition, end quote. This creates a perception that not only the drug is bad, but the people who take them, in this case Blacks, are bad as well. This has the effect of not only criminalizing the drug, but the people who take them as well, thus criminalizing Blacks and the drugs that they habitually use. Now that the public views a people and a drug they use as unfavorable, the issue attention cycle is now on the public policy piece, pushing lawmakers to make laws against said people and said drugs. One major example is the war on drugs. So what is it? Nixon and the Reagan administration coined this term in the late 1970s. His address to the nation on the campaign against drug use on September 14, 1986 stated that drugs, quote, drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions. They're killing our children. His administration claims that this is the main reason for the war on drugs. The Nixon era created the Drug Enforcement Administration, which we know as the DEA, which was a pivotal role in the arrest rates of minority individuals. He created mandatory minimums for 2 to 10 years for marijuana possession alone. Reagan's administration disproportionately attacked Black and brown individuals in his campaign, as well as put a stigma on who abuses drugs. He created the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984, which expanded penalties toward marijuana possession and further mandatory minimums. Then it's expounded on a system that disproportionately attacked minority individuals. And this time it had administrations reject rehabilitation and education as a whole. In US foreign policy and the war on drugs, analysis of a policy failure, Congressman Charles Rangel of New York City was beforehand criticized for the lack of strategy in providing drug prevention programs and its failure to provide appropriate leadership and policy to help with drug prevention. And this we see one of the many criticisms that the public perception has and what a lack of funds of rehabilitation can bring. The war on drugs negatively impacted how the public saw abusers in certain drugs as well. Depicted in the media and early television were Blacks being locked up for the same drugs that whites use at a much higher rate and being incarcerated at a much higher rate than whites, although using the same drugs. This helps us attack the question, what should rehabilitation and punishment look like for all people? The war on drugs that wasn't wasted whiteness, dirty doctors, and race and media coverage of prescription opioid misuse sheds further light on this claim. It discusses images of young, thin white women having the media capture define a century of media-driven imagery that established who was and who was not a heroin user. These images defied or went against the national stigma that has been put on those who use drugs. Because most of the abusers resided in urban areas, media attention went to those areas displaying what drugs do to a community. A now televised stigma placed a generation of generalizations on those who use drugs and the intervention taken to aid such users. Blacks at this time were portrayed as, quote, more menacing and criminal than whites in news stories involving drug use, end quote. These representations racially code urban drug epidemics such as crack cocaine as black or brown. Little to no real intervention took place on this stigma in this time period. However, when an epidemic is coded as a middle class, largely white suburban problem, different representational strategies and interventions are involved. Individual white drug users are portrayed as largely blameless victims of their own biology and deserving of help, such as treatment and prevention of complications such as overdose and infection. These two stigmas in public perception have the ability to label Blacks much differently than whites in any other race, even though using proceeds from the same group of people. This is a very misleading worldview of who uses drugs and opioids and struggles with addiction. Therefore, the public perception with policy could change, just as it did with 9/11. Was the war on drugs racially motivated? This is John Ehrlichman. Some of you may know him from the war on drugs. And this is what he had to say about it. And you will surely know why the audio was removed as well. You want to know why? You want to know what this war on drugs was really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be against the war or Black, but by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt their communities. We could arrest their leaders. We could raid their homes. We could break up their meetings. And we could vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Rehabilitation versus criminalization. So there's a lot of definitions for rehabilitation on the internet, so I wanted to specify one. It serves the purpose of nursing an individual back to health, and is the action of restoring someone's health to normal life through training and therapy after imprisonment, addiction, or illness. Rehabilitation has shown to be effective in having users gain an education and understanding of usage, preventing them from relapse, which the traditional method finds hard to do. Further study on this topic is always needed, and with extensive research, this demonstrates why. However, for public opinion to change on the attitude of drugs, there must be real change on education of rehabilitation and drug uses as described. In 2020 alone, the current traditional method has a 77% recidivism rate after 5 years. This means that just 3/4 of inmates who are incarcerated and leave will see the inside of a prison cell again in just 5 short years. Rehabilitation as a whole is understudied, underfunded, and misrepresented. In order for it to be a successful avenue, it deserves more monetary compensation and attention, as well as a serious dive into specific programs. Here are some variables and questions that were observed in the study. So here's my 2 questions right here. And these are my independent variables, and these all affect rehabilitation versus criminalization. The drug choice variable influences my dependent variable because of the sentencing attached with each one. In the war on drugs, various sentencing rates change depending on the drug used. For example, crack is the same substance as cocaine. However, different sentencing rates depended on which substance is inhibited. The only pharmaceutical difference between the 2 substances is the way the drug is ingested. Crack is smoked while cocaine is snorted. Crack yields more sentencing than cocaine, even though studies show that there are no significant differences between the chemical makeup of both drugs. Demographic origin, race, and user of drugs. So I combine these 2 right here. The demographic of the drug user affects the sentencing rate of the offender. As mentioned in drug choice, crack and cocaine have various sentences, even though they are the same drug. The racial motivation from sentencing comes from the origin of where the drug user comes from. Statistically, crack is located in more inner city urban areas, whereas cocaine is placed in a more Caucasian neighborhood. The sentencing behind these drugs has a correlation to racial motivation because of the demographic stigma that comes with the user's usage. Cultural perception of where drug is used. The cultural perception of where drugs are administered and taken affects criminalization versus rehabilitation. If drugs are not only seen as a criminal act, less sympathy will be provided for an abuser, thus making rehabilitative programs and efforts to push rehabilitation in a region. For example, the Bible Belt of the US may have a different view of drugs than us up north. The conduct in a rehabilitative system affects the effectiveness of the program. The training, the methods used to cure addiction, and more affects the rehabilitative process. Here are 3 hypotheses of the study. So I wanted to know, does public perception of drugs and drug usage influence whether people think an offender deserves rehabilitation services? Also, is the traditional method of punishment less effective than possible rehabilitation? And does the respondent's public perception of drug use influence their preference on the amount of time spent in jail for an offender? Here are the results of and the methods of my study. So first I started with background information to get the demographics. This will be used to determine age, residential status, and other locating factors that help identify the participant. For example, this is O Block. For those of you who don't know, this is 63rd and Parkway Garden. As you can see, they might have a different view of drugs than we do. A lot of where I'm from, marijuana is taken, so it might be different again from the Bible Belt of the United States. The cultural perception section questions if the participant feels that the public has an understanding of how drugs are viewed. Cultural perception defines the way public in certain areas look at specific issues. For example, the Bible Belt looks at drugs differently than more liberal areas of the United States once again. So here are some of the questions, and this is a building that I actually grew up at. We actually had alcohol being a drug itself. We actually had a lot of alcoholics on the corner outside of our house. And alcohol being a drug, they might have a different view on it than we do in a professional setting. And this is criminalization versus rehabilitation. And here is the design of one of my questions. Person A has been recovering from usage of crack, however, relapsed after 5 years of sobriety. Their friend, person B, heavily suggested that person A uses and that they could just get another ship. When urged, person A conceded and reestablished their addiction. Concurrently, a federal informant arrests both of them. How many years does person A deserve? And how many years does person B deserve? Let's actually play. How many years does person A deserve?
I would say 0.
How come?
I think that the 5 years of sobriety shows the progress made, and that punishing progress seems to be pretty backwards in terms of achieving a better one.
What about person B? It's a little bit harder.
I think 0. I don't think that.
I can move that for you.
I don't think that there's anything criminal there, so I'd say.
Okay.
I'm not sure person B is being a very good friend, but unfortunately, we can't criminalize that.
Yeah. And here's the response data. I put it after so it doesn't necessarily waver your answers. So a lot of people would actually agree with Blake. 24.6.
I just simply sound surprised that people would agree with you.
Nah. I'm actually surprised that it's this much. 24% of people would say 0 to 5 years. 1.6% would say 5 to 10. The same for 15 to life in prison. And 62.3% said that person deserves rehabilitation. And 9.8 says no sentence. Let's try another one. Person A has been a hardcore drug addict since he dropped out of high school 5 years ago. They use meth 4 times every week, and every paycheck they receive from McDonald's is allocated $100 for drug use. Recently, person A's dealer turned out to be an informant, and person A was arrested. What sentence do they deserve? What's your name in the back? Back right? My right.
Me?
Yeah,
Judge Deal.
Judge Deal. What do you think?
Put us on the spot because with me is my colleague Judge Meyer, and on hypotheticals like this, we're not supposed to say what we would do. So it would actually probably be a violation of the judicial ethics code here in Illinois. Our apologies. And it's not that we want to pass, but we also don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah. I'm sure Myra wants to take your place. What do you think? Okay. What about person? Okay. Here's the response data from the previous question. 32% would sentence him to 0 to 5 years. 3.2 would sentence him to 5 to 10 years. 6.5 to 15 in life. And 53% would agree with Myra in saying that rehabilitation that they deserve, and no sentence will be attached to 4.8%. So some of the most notable findings of my study is that 74% of people who think that the public is properly educated about drugs would choose rehabilitation or no sentence for most of our examples. And that's if they thought that the drug or the public was properly educated about drugs, and even if they didn't think that the public was properly educated about drugs, no matter their origin, where they're from. 25% of those who use drugs think that the public is educated about drug safety. So a little bit of bias. I don't think the public back home, at least for me, is educated about drugs. I don't think they are. I think a lot of our rehabilitative systems in Chicago were closed down in 2011, 2012. They closed six of the rehab facilities down just because of budget cuts. And I would argue that the public is not educated about drugs either. So what? There needs to be a drastic change in how the United States deals with incarceration and incarcerated individuals. The study that I have revealed that not only people who use drugs are in danger of being stereotyped, but people who don't use drugs, who look like me, who just have the paraphernalia, are in danger of being stereotyped as well. This could be dangerous to advance in the United States, as people that look just like me or just like you are the future of this country. And here's some limitations of my study. So a huge limiter was statistical significance. I wanted to get over 100 respondents, but I only got around 70, 80. And the amount of respondents based, I had to combine some variables to get statistical significance, just so I had enough people in each category. And because I think the questionnaire might be biased, at least from my point of view, from just taking it myself, I framed the questions. I didn't purposely frame the questions in a way that would be misleading, but I can see how from a person who does not use drugs, who does not agree with my standpoint, would not agree with the line of questioning. Some of the strengths, I think, is the location. I got Harlanville, Chicago, a little bit of Springfield, a little bit of St. Louis, and a lot of the various areas. So I got a lot of people who were from different cities and different states in the study. And the detailing of the survey, I think, was pretty pristine in my opinion, but I'm not biased. Questions? Y'all don't gotta be scared. Or responses, yeah.
I got a question. So being someone who works in a drug rehabilitation facility, I wanted to ask.
You can speak a little louder.
Oh, being someone who works in a drug rehabilitation facility, do you believe that rehabilitation is advertised in certain different demographics more than others? Because I heard you mentioning about people in certain areas not being educated enough.
Yeah. Rehabilitation is not only advertised, but placed in different areas and where it may seem fit. Some people, like I reported earlier, some people may see Black and brown individuals as undeserving of help, and they necessarily won't use rehabilitation to its effect. Even in Dr. Ryan's class, I learned this semester that rehabilitation is not all it's cracked up to be. Some rehabilitative facilities skip processes, only care about insurance, which I'm sure you know.
Oh, yeah.
And are just subpar because of the amount of funding that goes into it.
Dr. Bradley has a question. I'm gonna change the screen view a little bit so we can see our online participants.
Okay. You can go ahead, Dr. Bradley.
You should start, Dr. Bradley.
He's muted.
You muted.
You're muted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so Nicholas, thank you. No, I just want to say that to everybody, I've seen Nicholas in a teaching mode a couple times before in a very serious way, and this is another one of those events. So I'm really happy, Nick, to see you get into the teaching mode that you're capable of. I really like the work that you've done. I especially think the perceptions of you put it in terms of the way that people are educated generally with respect to drug use, with respect to its effects, with respect to the responses to addiction and criminality and so on. And I absolutely agree with you. A lot of this is tied in with racism and also perhaps with religious and political affiliations that people have. I was just wondering, how much thought did you give along the way to I think a kind of a equally important question, and that is, why do people get involved with the misery of drugs in the first place, whether it's opioids or meth or crack cocaine and so on? How much consideration did you give to those questions?
Yeah, I actually talked about this at the beginning of the seminar. The reason why people get into drugs and opioids in the first place is to cure an undefined pain. A lot of people don't have any other avenues to turn to or any other routes that they feel like they will go to in life. But drugs are always there. There's always somebody dealing on it, or at least where I'm from. There's always somebody dealing on the street. It's easily accessible. It's more accessible than rehabilitation, actually. I would rather, just go to someone on the street than take 4 bus trips downtown and go to a rehabilitative facility and then pay the price. It's just easily accessible, and it gets you high. It's a dopamine.
I got you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good job, Nicholas.
Yeah, appreciate it. Much love. Go ahead.
First of all, I want to commend you on your presentation. I think it kind of hit home in a lot of areas. A lot of people that don't get to talk about or they don't get to hear. I guess my question to you is, what motivated you to do this presentation in this drug area?
I know you've seen that building where we grew up at.
Well, that's true. That's true.
That was just one of the motivating factors, though. Like, I think a lot of things motivated me. One being an area we grew up in, but another thing that motivated me throughout this study is just the sheer misrepresentation and how public perception views Black people and those that take drugs. It's astonishing how many Black people are statistics and how different it looks from the college environment than back home. It's just a lot different.
Well, you did hit where you say that a lot of people tend to go to drugs because of, it can be depression, it can be they upset, or they have, I guess I want to say, engine to or a channel to go to make them feel good. But I really think the drugs is not the problem. I think it's the person itself. A lot of people kind of tend to, like, for instance, they say, well, guns kill people, but I think people kill people because a gun is a safety mechanism, but it takes a person to pull the trigger for a chain reaction to happen. So I think that when I was listening to you about some of your areas, I think that I really think it's the people, and I think the people themselves needs the help to kind of counteract and not to do certain things. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sometimes there's always outliers in the study of people who just don't want to help themselves and moreover don't want to get help at all. I think with drugs, the like sometimes being in a state of comfortability or uncomfortability, you're comfortable being uncomfortable. So some people they may not want to change. Some people they may not want to get help. But that's not true for the case of many people. I think many people and research will show that it's the avenue that they take. I mean, some people make the wrong choices in life.
So basically what you're saying is that a person will find something easy to go to make them feel better, and you thinking drugs is the majority of the problem in America?
Drugs is just the avenue I'm talking about.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Somebody got a question? That's fine.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's pretend, hypothetical,
Yeah.
because I can ask you all the ones I want. President Biden calls you up and says, I heard about your research and previous administration declared state of emergency to deal with opioids. I've got a stack of cash. Tell me how to spend it. What would you tell them to do? In other words, what should the government do based off of what you have found in your study?
More, as stated earlier, more money and time should be allocated to rehabilitative programs because the reason rehabilitative programs fail most of the time is because of lack of funding. As I stated earlier, there was about some facilities in very own Chicago that closed because of budget cuts and the lack of funding. And once an issue has money and attention, then the people will come all together and try to fix the problem. You put the right people in the right places, I think that'll make a lot of change.